Hi, Laurie.
Hello.
Hello. So, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. If you're new here, we hold pre-launch Q&As with mystery and thriller writers every Monday for #Mystery Monday because Mondays can be murder. Laurie Dove is a debut author, and we're going to be talking to her tonight about Mask of the Deer Woman, her first book. But first of all, I just want to say that my name is Danielle Trussoni, and I'm sitting in for Sarah DeVello, who is usually here. It's really an honor for me to be here with you. Where are you? Where are you right now, Laurie?
I'm in Kansas.
And have you always lived in Kansas? I just want to give people a feeling
Oh,
about you and your life and where you're from.
yes, absolutely. So I am originally from Kansas. I am happy to call it home. I was adopted as an infant by a Mennonite farm family here, and I grew up on a farm. It was a wonderful way to grow up. And I have Indigenous heritage through my birth family, and I am happy to still call this area home. I was previously the mayor of the town that I've lived in now for 20 some years, Valley
Wow,
Center. Yes,
that's
so
amazing.
it's a lovely, lovely community.
Well, so I grew up in the Midwest too, so I'm a fellow Midwesterner, sort of. I'm from Wisconsin originally.
Oh, Wisconsin people are so, so nice. We've
Oh,
had
thank you. I'm
wonderful visits there.
For those of you who can't see me, I'm blushing. Okay, so let's talk about your debut novel, Mask of the Deer
Yes.
Woman. Laurie, your protagonist, Detective Carrie Starr, moves to the reservation where her father was raised in the wake of her own tragedy. In your book, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. The subject must have some personal resonance for you. Can you tell me why the subject is important to you?
Well, it's important because when one woman is missing, it's too many. It impacts all of us. And I'm the mother of daughters. I have several daughters, and this really hit home with me as I was writing the book and doing research and realizing the scope of the missing Indigenous women crisis that's in our country right now.
What kind of research did you do? You mentioned that when you were doing
Yes.
research for this. So I imagine it's a very particular kind of process for you to be doing that kind of research.
Well, my background is as a reporter and a journalist, and so I am naturally research driven. So I researched all kinds of things for this book that I had an interest in, everything from these specific kind of endangered insects to geology to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And what really struck me about that in my research was that the numbers are so high. According to a federal database, there's approximately 5,500, probably more, women who are reported as missing. But the truth is, the actual number is most likely much higher because of gaps in jurisdiction, in mandatory reporting, and those kinds of issues.
I want to go back into the research and what you discovered. But
Mhm.
first, for those, since your book is coming out tomorrow, the people that are here with us, and there are some questions in the chat that I'm going to get to in just a second.
Great.
But the people who are with us don't know what your novel is about. Do you mind just giving just a brief overview about your book and the story that you've written?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So, Mask of the Deer Woman is really about an ex Chicago detective named Carrie Starr who is at rock bottom following her teenage daughter's death. And she is kind of asked to leave the force after that. She is really mad with grief. And as a result, she takes a job on the reservation in Oklahoma, right over the Kansas state line, where her father was raised. Now, Carrie Starr has never been there before. She is very clearly an outsider. She is not familiar with any of the culture. And so I definitely wrote this through the lens of this character being an outsider in this fictional reservation. And once she arrives there, she's really just swamped in this own grief process that she's going through. But she begins to quickly realize what some of the issues are there, primarily that of missing or murdered Indigenous women. And as she settles in, right away, in the first few days on the job, she realizes there's a missing college student from the reservation. And then we go on to really understand the scope of this issue.
It sounds fascinating. I love when I'm in the middle of a propulsive story, but I'm also learning about such important issues. So this is probably my favorite kind of book. Also,
Me too.
I'm a research nerd, so I'm someone who's always researching and putting it in my fiction. So as I mentioned, there's some people here in the chat, and I'm going to just read some messages that are here for you. So Renee says, "Hi, Danielle and Laurie from Southeast Florida." Hi, Renee. And then someone says, "Mayor Laurie, how cool is that? I love it. Happy early pub day, Laurie." Greetings from Northeast Ohio. And then there's another comment saying, "Laurie, getting such praise from Deborah J. Ledford is high praise indeed. I really appreciate her efforts in sharing Indigenous stories authentically." So
Thank you.
there's a lot of people here who are excited to hear about your book. So I know that Native people make up less than 2% of the American population, but the murder rate is 10 times more than the national average. This fact is just, it makes one feel outrage. So I'm sure that as you were researching, how do you balance writing and creating a story with a sense of, I don't know, I don't want to just say outrage, but advocacy, or maybe your instinct as a nonfiction writer to try to find ways to make this into a social justice issue rather than a piece of fiction, if you know what I'm saying? That must have been a tension that you had while you were writing this.
It is, but it was really kind of a natural balance for me to strike. This is really the conversion of these two possible worlds for me. As growing up Mennonite with a family that has and a community that has concerns about social justice, that's really an everyday part of my life. But then discovering this other part of my history and my heritage, and really um, understanding the scope of this issue that's facing women, and being someone who feels very strongly about empowering women and being an empowered woman to my daughters and the people that are around me. It was really something that felt important for me to anchor this fictional story with, because I too love books that are fiction, that are a great story, but that I learned something from them. And that's what I'd hoped for this book as well. It is really just my way to raise awareness about an important issue that not everyone outside of certain circles knows about in any in depth way. And my hope is that in some small way, this will help raise that consciousness level.
It's a wonderful it's a wonderful, I hate the word, actually it's not wonderful, but it's an important topic, and one that I don't hear very often. I read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of books in general, but I don't hear it that often. So thank you for writing this. It must have, I have a question about your journey, your personal journey from being a reporter and someone who wrote nonfiction to being a mayor to writing a debut novelist. Was there one sort of incident, or was there something that happened to you that made you change from, veer off your path into fiction
Yes.
writing?
Well, fiction writing was really always the path. That was the dream. I was an early reader and an early writer, and I knew at a very young age that I wanted to write fiction. And what was really a revelation about it was the first time I read a book as a young child that had both all the wonderful qualities that books have, but also real life things that I was interested in as I was growing up. And I thought, aha, this is it, because I'm curious about everything. I'm interested in so many things. And this ability to explore those things through fiction, I think, is a very special thing to be able to do. Now, I became a journalist because I really care about telling people stories. And as a journalist, that felt like important work. And I stayed in that line of work for a long time. And I felt that it was very rewarding. And as I became more and more a part of my community, and the older I got, I think I really developed this greater sense of compassion for the world around me. And that led me into service as the mayor of my town, because I really felt compelled to try to improve the place that I am for all of us. And, I do feel that parts of that carried over into the writing of this novel. I graduated with a master's degree when I was 50. And I did that degree because, one, I love school, I love researching and all of those things. And to be able to read and write and talk about craft all day was the time of my life. But it gave me the structure and the time to block out to write a novel. And my goal was to leave the program with a novel written. And that's what I was able to do. Because when it's not something that at least for me, when I didn't know how it would be received, I didn't know how it would turn out. And I really enjoyed that quick turnaround of journalism and being able to see that impact fairly quickly. And so writing the novel always got pushed to the bottom of my list. So I knew that it felt important to me to be able to make time for it. And that was really the shift.
Yeah, but once you sort of get that in your system, it's hard to let it go, I imagine. Now that you've had that time, that your MFA program gave you, and you've gotten into the rhythm of writing fiction, is there another book in you? Do you see yourself writing more fiction? And if so, do you feel like giving us a little hint about what that might be?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you for asking that. Well, I'll never stop. I am, and that was the point when I was writing, when I had written this book and I was sending it out. I thought, I'm going to send it out, but I'm not really going to think about that. I'm going to write the next book and the next book and the next book, because I want to write books for the rest of my life. And whether or not this is received in a certain way, that's what I'm going to do. So there is actually, I'm happy to report, a second book and potentially a third. So I'm on contract for 2 more novels, and this will now be a series. So I'm very excited about that, because Carrie Starr, this main character, she's complex, she's complicated, she's sometimes frustrating, and she has a lot of potential for personal growth. And I'm excited to see where she goes.
I'm excited to see where she goes. That's great news. I'm glad I asked you that question. And so I'm just going to pause here to say that everyone who's listening, take this opportunity to go order Laurie's book, from Murder by the Book. It's a wonderful independent bookstore. She will personalize it for you. There will be a signed book plate for you, and Murder by the Book will mail it to you. Or if you're in Texas, you can stop by and get it yourself. But this is a wonderful way to support authors, independent booksellers, and all of us by buying it at an independent bookstore. So now that I know that you're an addicted writer, now that I know that you're one of us, what is your routine? How do you write now that you are not in your MFA program, and you're sort of out in the wild with the mother and, living your life? Do you set aside time every day? Do you have an office? How does that work?
This is the question I ask every other writer. And this is always what I'm looking up about other writers. I love this question. And I think the truth for me is that I'm still trying things on. Every time I come across another writer's routine, I'm like, oh, I'm going to try that. I'm going to do that. The one I haven't been able to do, there's this writer that I heard interviewed that talked about going for a swim off the Amalfi Coast and then coming back and writing. Now from Kansas, I haven't done that one.
Sounds pretty great. I
It
think
does,
we should
doesn't
do
it?
that. Let's go jump into the ocean and come back and write another chapter.
Yeah, it does sound kind of inspiring. But what I like to do, I get up and write. Actually, the first thing I do, I read in some kind of craft book. I am just in love with the study of writing. And I find I have a whole, well, a couple of shelves of craft books, and I haven't read them all, but I've discovered that um, I can walk over there and somehow pick the right book for the right time in my life. And as I'm reading it, I find things, oh, I'm going to practice that in what I'm writing, or, oh, that's, it's very inspiring. So I do that first for about, 45 minutes or an hour, and then I write. And I really try to get in a solid, 6 hours. And not all of that is writing, but it is a lot of thinking. I find that the hardest distance to bridge is from the brain to the page. And I often hold these thought auditions where I'm taking a character down the path. I ask a lot of what if questions. And so some of that time is really spent what looks like staring out a window. And then I have a lot of writing time as well. I usually write about 1,000 words or an hour or so. So it doesn't take too long for me to get a lot of words in. But the trick for me is the decision making. That's what takes the longest. When I know where I'm going, then I really am able to get there. But when I was writing the first book, I really had to almost trick my brain. So I would assign myself things to write, and then I would be able to write it. I had to sort of take my doubt out of the equation as a first time novelist.
I love that. So, to take the doubt out, did you make a schedule for yourself or an outline? Like, did you set up sort of expectations that you had to fulfill? I don't know. I'm fascinated by what other writers do too, which is why I'm asking you all these
Yes.
questions.
No, these are great questions. Well, I think I did it all backwards, but it worked for me. So I wrote a short story. And when I wrote the short story, I wrote the ending first. And that ending is still almost exactly the ending that ended up in the novel. But once I'd written the short story, that's when I knew just immediately I could spend a lot of time with this character, Carrie Starr. And so I kind of deconstructed that short story as the framework for the novel. And it was a very simple deconstruction, basically just a beginning, middle, and end. And then I wrote it. And I wrote it fairly quickly. At one point, I wrote the middle of the book. I wrote like 60,000 words in 4 days in the middle. I just had
What?
to.
Hold on a second. Hold on. What?
Yeah. Oh, no, it was ridiculous. I don't think I should do it again. I got a shoulder injury from my laptop. Like it was a little wild. Yes. But I had to just sort of muddle my way through the middle of it because I couldn't figure out how to do it. And the only solution was to write.
Getting through. Wow, I'm so
Yeah.
impressed. That's an amazing story. And I know that you got a master's degree from Harvard, right? That's where
Yeah.
you did your MFA.
Mhm.
Was there any sort of writing lessons that you took away from your MFA, or I did an MFA too, and I remember
Uh-huh.
feeling like the best thing that I took from it was time. But
Yeah.
there are also really important writing craft lessons. Is there something you could share with your readers?
Mm. Well, I took a lot of things away from it, but one thing that I puzzled over this for several years, even during the program, after the commencement. It was an early class that I took. It was a short story class. And, I want this so bad. So I was very, no, I just wanted it. And so I wrote this short story, and I was really, kind of, um, I had trouble gauging, like, is this what is this? Is it decent or not? And so I sent that to my professor, and really the only comment that I got back was more dog, right? There was a dog in it, but it didn't figure very prominently. And I
Love
puzzled
dogs.
over that, and I edited it, and I just made these smaller changes. And I'm like, and when I sent it back, it was still pretty much the same reaction, more dog. And so that is really my code to myself, because what I learned was when I got some edits, the first round of edits back on this debut novel, and they weren't prescriptive, they were great suggestions, or maybe think about this. And I set it down for a moment, and I thought, oh, more dog. This is my story. And I tore it all apart in different areas, and I just felt like I was really making it better then. So I think the key is really in the editing. Don't be afraid to really mess with your story once it's written, because you can make it better that way.
Such great advice. I'm a writer too, and I've ripped up. I remember with my first novel, I had it written, and I took it chapter by chapter and laid it out on the floor of the living room, and ended up moving the chapters physically around, and then putting it back together and rereading it. And there really is something beneficial about just mixing it up and seeing what you've got, thoughtfully, of course. So we have a few questions here from in our chat. Renee is asking, she says, you mentioned that you grew up Mennonite. How did you find out that you are also Native?
Oh, I love that question. Well, I don't say that I'm Native because I am not a member of a federally recognized tribe. And so I say that I'm Indigenous for that reason. I want there to be no misrepresentation of who I am. But I always knew my parents did what I think was a very smart thing. I always knew that I was adopted. I was told my adoption story a lot, and and I always knew it was a closed adoption, but I always had this heritage information that my parents shared not only with me, but our entire extended family and community. And so there was never a secret. In fact, it really felt special. It felt like I had the best of all worlds growing up in this way.
That's wonderful. And then one more question. I just lost it. There's questions scrolling down. Okay, here. Which character in your book is your favorite? And which character was the most difficult to write, and why? That's a question from Renee.
Oh, wow. Renee asks good questions. That's an
Yeah.
excellent question. Let's see. My favorite. I think I would have to say that Carrie Starr is my favorite character, just because I've gotten to know her so well. I also really like the character, although she doesn't have as much presence on the page in this particular story. I really also like Chenoa, and she was the college girl that was missing. And what we learn about her is that she's incredibly focused and resilient, and we get to see how she also in some ways explores her commitment to her community. And as far as difficult to write, that's a great question. I just don't think I can pull out a character that I really struggled with, because I spent so much time with them in my head before I even wrote them, that I felt like they were um, fully formed three-dimensional characters, and I really enjoyed writing all of them.
Yeah, I feel like when you spend so much time writing a book and it becomes part of your internal dialogue, it's hard. Even the bad ones, right? Even the
Yeah.
bad people. I ended up liking my villains, which is kind of weird, I guess. But anyway, that's fascinating to hear your story and about how you became your journey through everything to become a novelist. And I'm so happy to hear that there are more books coming and that this is a series. Congratulations. And before we check off, I guess you could say, or check out or log off, I want to remind everybody to please go buy a copy of Laurie's book. It's available tomorrow, but you can pre-order it now. And all of those sales, whether they're coming from, Murder by the Book or from your local independent bookstore, help the author, and they help our whole community. So thank you for buying Laurie's book. And thank you, Laurie, for being here. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you. And thank you to everyone that tuned in or watches this later. And thank you for the wonderful questions. You're very good at what you do.
Oh, thank you. Have a good night, Laurie. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You too.